There's something eerily quiet about a house when words stop living inside it. For Ethan Miller, that silence had become deafening. He sat in his study, the afternoon light slanting through half-closed blinds, painting bars of dusty gold across the hardwood floor. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly, not from age, he was only 38, but from something heavier. Something knotted in his chest, too tight to name. The cursor blinked on a blank screen. Day 53 of writing nothing. Outside the door, Claire laughed. Just a burst. Light, girlish, real. It wasn't meant for him. He blinked, tilting his head to listen. There it was again. Another soft giggle. Not forced. Not polite. Real. He hated how it made him feel, like a ghost in his own home. He pushed away from the desk and stood, stretching muscles that had locked into the curve of his leather chair. The sound of her voice stirred a ripple in him, and not the good kind. Claire used to laugh like that around him. Over wine in the kitchen. Under the covers after sex. Not anymore. Lately, that sound only seemed to bloom when Jake was around. Jake. The golden boy. His best friend. His brother in every way that counted. And now, possibly, something else entirely. Ethan padded barefoot into the hallway, trailing his hand along the cool wall. The house was warm, tastefully decorated, Claire's touches everywhere. Their three-bedroom colonial in upstate New York had always felt like a lived-in dream. But lately, it had become more like a well-maintained stage set. He heard her voice again, closer now, murmuring something he couldn't quite catch, followed by Jake's voice, lower and smooth, the kind of voice that always sounded like it belonged on a travel documentary or whispering into someone's ear. Ethan turned and walked past the staircase, into the kitchen. Claire was by the sink, hair pulled back in a casual knot, tank top snug against her body. Jake leaned against the island, drink in hand, a lazy smile on his lips. They stopped talking the moment he stepped in. "Hey," Ethan said, trying to make his voice sound natural. "Didn't know you were staying for dinner, Jake." Claire looked over her shoulder. "Oh, he just dropped by? I offered to throw something together." Jake grinned. "Hope you don't mind, man. You know me. Never say no to Claire's pasta." Something tightened in Ethan's gut. Not jealousy. Not yet. Just a sense that something wasn't where it should be. "Of course," Ethan said. "Why would I mind?" They were all smiles. Claire moved past him, her hand brushing his lightly. That used to send a jolt through him. Today he barely felt it. He walked to the window and stared into the backyard. The trees were beginning to hint at fall, their leaves tinged with orange and red. Change was coming, slow and inevitable. Behind him, Jake's voice carried easily. "Still working on the new book, E?" Ethan turned slowly, forcing a smile. "Trying. You know how it is." Jake chuckled. "You'll break through. You always do. Maybe you just need a change of scenery. Come with me next time I'm in Patagonia. Clear your head." Claire laughed. "Oh, that's just what Ethan needs. A tent and 2 weeks of eating freeze-dried stew." They both laughed. Ethan didn't. He watched them, watched her, and in that moment, something hit him, quiet and sharp. She was glowing. Not in an obvious way. Not makeup. Not a tan or some spa treatment. It was deeper than that. A vibrancy. A flicker behind her eyes. She looked more alive than she had in months. And he hadn't been the one to light her up. That night, after Jake had left, after the fake hugs and shoulder claps, Claire climbed into bed beside him with a book. She smelled like rosemary and lavender shampoo. Her thigh brushed his under the covers, warm and smooth. He thought about reaching for her, but she didn't look up, didn't lean in. Instead, she turned a page, her voice casual. "You should come to yoga with me this weekend. There's a retreat upstate." "You think that'll cure my writer's block?" he asked. She shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe it'll help you let go of the idea that everything needs to be perfect. The mind needs breath, Ethan. You've been tense." He didn't respond. She didn't press. She never did anymore. Later, while she slept curled toward the window, Ethan stared at the ceiling, the glow of the digital clock casting a dim green hue across the room. Jake had been around more often lately. Sometimes, Ethan came home early to find Jake already there, sitting on the patio with Claire, sipping wine. Sometimes he stayed late, claiming he drank too much to drive. Once, Ethan found one of Jake's shirts in the laundry. He told himself it was paranoia. He told himself he was being irrational. He told himself stories for a living. This was just his imagination running wild. But a novelist knows when a plot is unraveling, when the story is changing underneath his feet, even if he's not ready to admit it. The next morning, Ethan walked into his study and stared at the blank page again. But this time, a line floated to the surface. He could feel the fire, but not the warmth. Only the smoke. He typed it. Slowly. Like pulling glass from a wound. The cursor blinked, waiting. And he blinked back, waiting for the courage to see what the fire would burn down. It started with dust. Ethan had been rummaging through the boxes in the attic, looking for an old moleskine notebook he used to scribble ideas in before fame, deadlines, and expectations made writing feel like surgery. He hadn't touched the attic in months. Claire called it his graveyard of good intentions. The boxes smelled of paper and time. One had yoga retreat scribbled on the side in Claire's looping handwriting. That's what triggered the memory. She had taken one of his journals last fall, claiming it would be good for her introspective exercises while she was away. Something about gratitude, chakra cleansing, spiritual journaling. He hadn't thought about it since. He flipped the lid open. Tucked between a rolled-up mat and a reusable water bottle was the leather-bound notebook, scuffed corners. Pages rippled with humidity. He pulled it out gently, brushing off a fine layer of dust. The moment his fingers touched the cover, something in him stilled. A breath held. A premonition. Maybe he shouldn't open it. But writers are curious creatures. Even wounded ones. Ethan carried the notebook downstairs, into his study. The late morning light slanted across his desk. The silence in the house felt heavier today. Claire had gone to a lunch thing with her old college roommate. He didn't ask which one. He sat down and opened the book. The first dozen pages were his, a mix of unfinished sentences, poetry fragments, and strange one-liners like "The moon doesn't mourn the tide, it just pulls." He smiled faintly. That line had potential. Then the handwriting changed. Claire's script. Loopy, elegant, fluid. He almost closed the book right then, but didn't. I need to be honest, even if just here. I don't feel guilty yet. I feel free. That terrifies me more than the act itself. His throat tightened. The date was from 6 months ago. It wasn't planned. I didn't go to the retreat expecting to fall for someone. It just happened. Jake was supposed to be a distraction, a familiar face. Instead, he became the only place I felt seen. Jake. She wrote his name like a breath, not like a sin. Ethan's eyes scanned the next entry, the words digging into him like claws. The first time, it was under the stars. A night hike. I was barefoot, wearing my old pink Converse. The same ones I wore when I first kissed Ethan, back in college. I kept thinking how weird that was. How symbolic. He stopped reading. His chest felt carved out. A dull ache radiated in waves from his sternum, spreading up his throat, into his eyes. That detail, the pink Converse, was the kind of thing only a writer would obsess over. Specific. Metaphoric. Weaponizable. He should have been angry, but he was still in shock. He flipped more pages, almost compulsively. Each entry layered the betrayal in shades of confession and euphoria. We stayed up till sunrise, talking about the lives we wanted, not the ones we have. Jake said I deserved to feel alive again. When I got home, Ethan kissed me on the forehead. I almost cried. How can I miss someone I don't even know how to talk to anymore? Ethan closed the notebook slowly, like it was a live grenade. For a long time, he didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the wall, letting the silence wrap around him like a wet blanket. The betrayal wasn't loud. It didn't come with lipstick on a collar or sex noises behind a door. It came through ink, through confessions never meant to be read by his eyes. And yet, here it was, smoke curling off every page. He stood up and walked to the bookshelf, ran his hand along the spines of his novels. All those words, all that emotion he'd poured into other people's stories. Maybe it was time he wrote his own, but not a memoir. No, something more poetic. He sat back at his desk, opened a new document, let the cursor blink. Then he typed the opening line. She wore her pink sneakers into the fire, unaware she was leaving ashes in her wake. He stared at it, heartbeat quickening. Yes, this was the beginning, not of a book, of a reckoning. There are betrayals that explode, loud and immediate. And then there are betrayals that sink in slowly, like poison in tea. Ethan chose the poison. After reading Claire's journal, he didn't confront her. Didn't yell, didn't pack a bag, didn't even change the way he looked at her, at least, not obviously. The rage didn't rise in him like fire. It simmered, low and dense. He could feel it, though, beneath the surface, like a fault line waiting for the right moment to rupture. Instead, he wrote, obsession is a kind of grief. After all, he started sketching scenes, dialogues, not outlines, not plot points. No, this wasn't about structure yet. This was about release. Every morning after Claire left for her workout or volunteering event or coffee with Hannah, he sat at his desk and spilled versions of her onto the page, versions that betrayed, versions that begged, versions that smiled while their lips tasted like someone else. The novel began to take shape like bones under skin. His main character, Julian, a brooding novelist past his prime, loyal, quiet, patient to a fault. Julian's wife? A vibrant, restless woman named Lena, who wears her old pink sneakers on a night hike and comes home with the stars still tangled in her hair and a lie on her tongue. The best friend? Mason. Charismatic. Adventurous. The kind of man people follow without knowing why and never question until it's too late. Ethan wasn't even hiding the parallels. That was the point. The thrill wasn't in the fiction. It was in how close he could make it to the truth without breaking the spell. He gave them different names. But every tick, every phrase, every secret in Claire's journal, he folded it into the prose like a twisted prayer. Jake's favorite bourbon became Mason's obsession. Claire's nervous lip bite? That was Lena's tell when she lied. The pink sneakers? Still there. Unchanged. A symbol too perfect to alter. Sometimes, in the early morning, Ethan would catch Claire coming out of the shower, steam curling around her. He'd watch her for a moment. Her body, still toned, still beautiful. The way the towel clung to her hips, the curve of her lower back as she bent to pick up her lotion. There was still desire there. He hated that. Hated that he still wanted her. Still found her beautiful even as he peeled her open, page by page, in secret. But that was part of it, wasn't it? This fire he was feeding, it needed fuel. And attraction was flammable. One night, as she walked past him in a cotton sleep shirt and no bra, the outline of her nipple brushing the fabric, she looked back and smiled. You okay? He smiled back. Yeah, just writing. I miss when you used to read things to me, she said, playfully bumping his leg with hers. You might hear this one soon, he replied. And she laughed, unknowing. Later that week, Jake showed up again. Ethan heard the knock and knew it was him before Claire even opened the door. Jake always knocked 3 times. Casual, confident. Like he belonged. He stepped inside, that signature leather camera bag slung across his chest, aviators still on despite the cloudy sky. Claire greeted him like she always did, arms around his shoulders, too close, too warm. Ethan watched from the top of the stairs, just long enough to see Jake brush his fingers lightly across the small of her back. The touch was brief, almost meaningless. But Ethan caught it. Later that night, the 3 of them had dinner. Jake told stories about a trip to Laos, about riding motorbikes in the rain and eating grilled snake on the banks of the Mekong. Claire was enraptured, head tilted, eyes shining. Ethan sipped his wine and asked, Did you ever write any of it down? Jake shrugged. I don't write. I live it. Claire grinned. That's what I love about him. He's not a narrator, he's a storm. Ethan nodded slowly. Storms are beautiful. Until they level a town. Jake froze for a second. Just a beat. Claire looked between them, then laughed. God, Ethan. Always so dramatic. He smiled and reached for his wine again. It's the job. That night, he wrote for 5 straight hours. He didn't eat. Didn't speak. Just poured everything out. In one chapter, Julian watches Lena and Mason through a half-open window, seeing the silhouette of her body as it leans toward another man. The scene doesn't describe sex. It describes something worse, intimacy. The kind of touch that only comes when love has already shifted hands. In another chapter, Julian walks barefoot through his yard, late at night, imagining what it would feel like to burn everything he's ever built. He doesn't. Not yet. But the match is in his hand. The next morning, Claire left early. Yoga, she said. But she took her pink Converse. Not the Nikes. Not the slides. The pink ones. Ethan noticed. And smiled. Back in his study, he opened the document. Chapter 10 now. 47,000 words in. He scrolled back to the beginning. She wore her pink sneakers into the fire, unaware she was leaving ashes in her wake. He whispered it out loud. Then he whispered something else, words he hadn't said in weeks. Thank you, Claire. Not for the betrayal, but for the story. Writers lie for a living. But Ethan had never lied this well. By now, the manuscript had taken on a life of its own. A pulse. A hunger. He was writing 5, 6 hours a day, sometimes more. Words poured from him with the fluency he hadn't felt in years. But it wasn't just catharsis anymore. It was control. And control, after weeks of emotional fog, was intoxicating. The novel, Ashes in Her Shoes, wasn't a revenge fantasy. Not obviously. It was smarter than that. Cooler. It read like literary fiction, slow, poetic, unflinching. The kind of story that made readers sit in silence after finishing the last page, unsure whether they should cry, text someone, or burn something. Each chapter blurred the line between fact and fiction just enough to protect Ethan. But Claire and Jake? They'd know. That was the brilliance of it. It wasn't about calling them out. It was about letting them recognize themselves in the wreckage. He turned Claire into Lena, the charming, free-spirited wife who started bringing home a kind of wild sadness, one you could smell before you could name. In one chapter, Lena tells Julian, "I need space to remember who I was before you." In another, she whispers someone else's name in her sleep. Only the reader sees Julian watching her do it. Jake's stand-in, Mason, was a man made of sunlight and shadow. A walking contradiction. He photographed war zones but was afraid of emotional confrontation. Told stories that sounded profound but meant nothing. Flirted like he didn't even know he was doing it. Ethan had made him lovable at first. That was the trick. You had to build sympathy before the knife went in. In Chapter 14, Mason shares a monologue that feels almost too raw. "I don't want to be the bad guy. I just want to be the one she chooses when she forgets what loyalty costs." That line had come from a conversation Ethan overheard through the bathroom vent. Jake's voice, low and strained. Claire murmuring something in response. A giggle, then silence. Ethan had written it down in the margins of a bill envelope. He still kept it pinned to his corkboard. That's when he knew the best revenge was revelation. Slow, poetic, beautiful. He didn't tell anyone he was writing again. He didn't need the pressure, the curiosity, or the questions. This novel wasn't for the agents. It wasn't for his publisher. It was a confession in camouflage. Every sentence was a secret. Every metaphor was a match. He even gave Lena a scene that mirrored something real, something so specific, it would make Claire flinch if she read it. They made love on a blanket under the stars, the soles of her pink Converse still dusty from the trail. Her breath fogged in the autumn air as she whispered, "This is what it means to feel alive." That line was almost verbatim from Claire's journal. Ethan had memorized it. He placed it halfway through the book, just past the moment Julian realizes he's being lied to, but long before he decides what to do about it. And here's the irony, he didn't change the sneaker color. Didn't need to. No editor would question it. No reader would suspect it meant anything. But Claire would. She'd read that and feel the blood drain from her face. She'd look at Jake, and he would know. That was the goal. Not destruction. Not scandal. Not even confrontation. Just discomfort. The kind that lasts. By the end of the month, Ethan had passed 70,000 words. Claire had grown warmer again. Sweeter. She touched his shoulder more often. Leaned her head on his chest during movies. Even suggested they plan a weekend getaway together. Just us. No phones. He smiled. Said yes. Then wrote a chapter where Julian's wife, after sleeping with another man, starts acting more attentive, guilt masquerading as affection. The reader knows. Julian knows. But he says nothing. He just watches. And writes. One night, as Claire dozed beside him, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling, the quiet hum of the fan ticking like a slow metronome. He whispered aloud the final sentence he had just typed. "Forgiveness is what liars beg for when the truth makes them bleed." He closed his laptop and slept like a man with a secret. There's a thrill in anonymity that borders on erotic. Ethan had felt it before back in college, submitting short stories to obscure literary journals under pseudonyms, loving the idea of strangers reading his words without knowing whose mind had birthed them. It was like watching someone undress behind a one-way mirror. But this was different. This time, the anonymity wasn't about mystery. It was about protection and power. The manuscript was done. Ashes in Her Shoes. A title that came to him the night he'd seen Claire take out her old pink Converse from the closet and wipe the soles like they were relics. He'd watched from the doorway, silent, invisible. She hadn't noticed. And maybe she never would, not until the fire had already spread. He spent a week editing, then another shaping the tone into razor-thin precision. The prose was lean, elegant, and mean in all the right ways. There were no names, no locations, nothing that could trace the story back to him on the surface. Except to two people. He uploaded the manuscript under a pen name, R.M. Keller. Gender-neutral. Clinical. It sounded like someone who lived behind a heavy door, someone who knew too much and spoke too little. He didn't go to his usual agent. Instead, he submitted the manuscript to a small, fiercely intelligent indie publisher that prided itself on unflinching modern narratives. They were known for cultivating literary voices that didn't play nice. The editor's reply came 3 days later. We couldn't put it down. Raw. Devastating. Hypnotic. We want this. Call me. He didn't call. He emailed. Kept the mystery intact. RM prefers digital correspondence. She values privacy. That little word, the quiet lie, became a shield. The contract came quickly, with favorable terms and a rushed production schedule. The editor said she wanted to strike while the iron was blistering. Ethan agreed. Quietly. Deliberately. Claire had no idea he was even working on anything. The publisher handled the cover art, a minimalist photograph of a single, ash-dusted sneaker. Not pink, not anything as obvious. But close enough that when Claire eventually saw it, she might feel something like déjà vu scratching at her brain. The release date was set for 8 weeks out. In the meantime, the publisher launched an anonymous teaser campaign. Cryptic quotes on social media. Haunting ads on Book Talk. Snippets of passages like, "Sometimes love doesn't rot. It burns. And all that's left is the smell." And she said it didn't mean anything. That was the moment he knew it meant everything. Comments started rolling in. Who is R.M. Keller? This feels too real. I haven't been this gutted by a book excerpt since Ferrante. I bet it's a woman. The kind who's been through hell. Ethan watched it unfold from his study, sipping black coffee with the same calm control he used to wield when plotting out chapters in his early career. He'd missed this. The buzz, the tension, the quiet sense of something about to break open. But more than anything, he loved that Claire was still in the dark. She'd been coming home earlier lately. Cooking more. Even started leaving him little notes again, sweet nothings folded and slipped into his laptop bag, just like she used to. As if that would patch the hole she'd torn. As if kindness could be used like caulk, sealing cracks in a foundation she'd already set fire to. One night, as she scrolled through her phone beside him in bed, she paused. "Huh," she said softly. "Everyone's talking about this book." "What book?" Ethan asked without looking up from his own screen. "Something called Ashes in Her Shoes. They say it's devastating. Like, emotionally brutal. No one knows who the author is." He turned toward her, feigning disinterest. "Sounds intense." "Yeah." She frowned, then tilted her head. "Weird title, though, right?" He hummed, already picturing her face the day she got to chapter 12. By the time the release day came, Ethan wasn't nervous. He felt surgical. The book launched as a sleeper hit. Modest initial sales, but the right people started talking. Within 2 weeks, it hit number 3 on the small press bestseller list. 3 more, and it had its own dedicated Reddit thread, dissecting its symbolism. One Redditor asked, "Anyone else think the pink sneakers were symbolic of a lost version of herself?" Another replied, "Nah, I think someone got caught cheating. This whole thing reads like a confessional with a knife in it." Ethan bookmarked that comment. Claire started reading it the next night. He recognized the cover on her nightstand. "Picked up that book?" he asked casually. She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Everyone's talking about it. I figured I'd see what the fuss is about." He watched her thumb through the first pages. Waited. And when she reached the dedication, only 4 words, he watched her freeze just slightly. "For the one who knew." "Cryptic," she murmured. He smiled. Maybe that's the point. The morning after Claire picked up the book, Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before it all came undone. She had finished it by dawn. He knew because she came downstairs for breakfast, her face pale, her eyes distant, as if she'd just been pulled out of another world. "Did you stay up all night reading?" he asked, keeping his voice light. Claire didn't answer immediately. She reached for her coffee, eyes drifting toward the window, not meeting his gaze. It wasn't until she took a sip that she said, softly, "I don't know what to think." Ethan watched her, his pulse steady. "About what?" "The book." She placed the mug down and folded her arms, still not looking at him. "It's intense. Brutal. I've never read anything like it." He nodded, pretending disinterest. "Well, I'm sure that's the point." Claire's lips pressed together in a tight line. "It feels too personal. The details. The emotions." Ethan didn't flinch, but his heart quickened, just slightly. "I guess that's what makes it real," he said. "The author has to dig deep, right? Find the truth behind the fiction." Claire exhaled a soft breath, still lost in her thoughts. The part about the sneakers, her pink Converse, specifically, there was something unsettling about it. The way she talked about them. Ethan allowed a small smile to tug at his lips. "It's a powerful symbol. A symbol of what? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged, leaning back in his chair. You tell me. Claire's gaze flickered to him, then away again. The silence stretched long between them. Ethan had no intention of breaking it. He wanted her to linger in the discomfort, to sit in it long enough for the questions to surface on their own. When they did, he was ready. The first time Ethan saw Jake's reaction was in the kitchen. It was subtle at first, like a flicker in the air. Jake's hand tightened around his coffee mug as Claire told him about the book, her voice laced with the same unnerving uncertainty she'd had when she first finished it. You've got to read this, Claire said, offering the book to him. It's like something you'd never expect. Jake raised an eyebrow, glancing down at the cover, his fingers brushing the title. Ethan watched him carefully. I don't know, Jake said, his tone almost too casual. I'm not much of a reader. Come on, it'll only take a few hours. I think you'll get something out of it, she insisted. Jake didn't immediately agree, but Claire was persistent, pressing the book into his hands, as if it were something she needed him to understand. Ethan's eyes followed every motion, Jake's fingers shifting uneasily around the book's cover, Claire's eagerness, and the tension that rippled in the air like static. Jake didn't start reading that day, but that night, when Claire was asleep, Ethan found Jake sitting alone in the living room, the book open in his hands, his brow furrowed as he flipped through the pages. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, watching silently. Jake didn't notice him at first, absorbed in the words. But then he paused. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he turned a page faster than before, scanning the text with growing intensity. Ethan felt the moment when Jake's posture shifted, when his guard dropped. It was the moment Claire had reached in the book, the part with the pink sneakers. Ethan didn't move, didn't make a sound. He just stood there, watching the way Jake's body tensed, his face slightly flushed, the nervous tick in his jaw. After what felt like an eternity, Jake closed the book slowly, his lips pressed tight. He wasn't angry. He wasn't surprised. He was unsettled. And for the first time, Ethan saw something like guilt flicker behind his eyes. He waited, savoring it. And then, quietly, Jake got up, closed the book with a soft thud, and walked past him without a word. Ethan didn't stop him. The next morning, Claire was different. She was quieter than usual, her movements less fluid, as though she were walking through a fog. She made breakfast but didn't talk much. When Ethan spoke to her, she answered without her usual warmth. Her words were clipped, distracted. Jake, however, was back to his usual charm, pulling her into a conversation about work, his latest project, and some trip he was planning. These in his voice was almost too loud, too forced. Ethan had learned a long time ago that people don't confront the truth. They bury it, cover it up with more of the same distractions. They deflect until the lie becomes reality. He wasn't going to let them deflect anymore. After breakfast, when Jake had left for his shoot, Ethan sat down at his desk and stared at the screen. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before he began typing the next chapter. It wasn't just about the book anymore. It wasn't just about getting the story out. Now it was about making Claire and Jake face it. And face him. Sometimes, the ones we trust the most are the ones who know just how to wound us. With a smile, a touch, a whisper in the dark. And we let them. Because we want to believe in the good, even when all it does is burn. Ethan paused. He wasn't writing just for himself anymore. He was writing for them. The slow burn had begun. The fire didn't come all at once. It came in flickers, side glances, pauses in conversation, silent accusations hiding behind casual smiles. Claire had read the book twice now. Ethan noticed it sitting by her nightstand, spine creased, dog-eared in places she hadn't marked the first time. She never talked about it anymore, but he could tell she was chewing it silently, like a piece of meat too tough to swallow, too telling to spit out. The second time she finished it, she didn't sleep. He heard her shifting under the covers, her breath shallow and restless. When he pretended to stir and turn toward her, her body stilled like she'd been caught. She faced the wall. The wall between them, once invisible, had become unmistakable, and he wasn't lifting a single finger to take it down. The next day, it happened. Ethan had just finished loading the dishwasher when he heard the hushed voices, Claire and Jake, talking in the kitchen. He stayed just out of sight, behind the thin wall that separated the hallway from the dining nook. Their tones were urgent, whispered, but he had written enough dialogue to understand the emotion behind the volume. Panic. Claire's voice cracked first. You read it, didn't you? I did, Jake said, voice low. Twice. A pause. Then, there's no way he knows, Jake added. Right? Claire didn't respond immediately. The silence was longer than it should have been. Then, Faintly. The sneakers, Jake. The hike. The fucking stars. Ethan's jaw clenched. Her voice trembled. What are the chances that's coincidence? You're spiraling. Claire scoffed. Am I? There's a line in there about a laugh sounding different after betrayal. I've said that. To you. It's a book, Jake said quickly. It's not a confession. It is a confession, she hissed, then caught herself. Her voice dropped again. It's a confession in disguise. And we're the only ones who recognize it. Ethan leaned against the wall, eyes closed. He could almost see them, Claire gripping the edge of the counter, Jake trying to soothe her with those soft, practiced words that once made Ethan feel safe. Words that now only sounded like poison. There's nothing in there with our names, Jake insisted. If you react too strongly, you'll make it worse. He'll know you know. A beat passed. Then Claire, quieter. I think he already knows. Ethan smiled faintly. They were right, of course. No one else would know. Not their friends. Not their family. Not even the publisher. But they knew. And that was the entire point. That afternoon, Claire wandered into Ethan's study for the first time in weeks. She leaned against the doorframe, her body language uncertain. Can I ask you something? He didn't look up from his laptop. Of course. Have you ever written something that was more real than it seemed? Ethan tilted his head. All the time. She lingered in the doorway. I mean, something you pulled from your life. Something you didn't tell anyone was true, but it was. Now he looked at her. Her arms were crossed over her chest. Not defensive. Vulnerable. Waiting for a threat of denial she could hang her fears on. He offered none. I think all good fiction comes from truth, he said. The best stories are the ones we're too afraid to live out loud. She flinched. Just slightly. But he saw it. Why do you ask? He added casually. Her mouth opened, then closed. She hesitated, clearly weighing her next move. I'm reading this book, and it feels like the writer knows things they shouldn't. Things that aren't public. Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes unreadable. Funny how that works, isn't it? Claire swallowed. Do you think writers ever use real people in their work? People they know? People who hurt them? Sometimes, he said, but only when they want those people to feel it. Her breath hitched, he heard it. Saw her fingers twitch. Then she gave a weak smile, turned, and walked away. He didn't call her back. That night, Jake came over again. But this time, he didn't stay for dinner. He and Claire spoke in the driveway, heads close, voices tight. Ethan watched from the upstairs window, unseen. Jake gestured animatedly, but Claire shook her head over and over, her arms crossed, her mouth a hard line. Then Jake got in his car and drove off. Fast. When Claire came back inside, she didn't say a word. She poured herself a glass of wine, sat on the couch, and stared into the middle distance. The book rested beside her like a ticking bomb. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. The pages had already crawled under her skin. At midnight, Ethan returned to his study. He opened the manuscript, added a new chapter. His fingers danced across the keys. She said the stars didn't feel as far away that night. That was her mistake. She thought the sky would keep her secret. But the sky is where the truth echoes. He closed the laptop, satisfied. The familiar fire had caught. And this time, they were the ones burning. Ethan didn't plan to speak. Not really. He had always preferred silence. Observing. Writing. Letting others talk while he listened with the precision of a man taking notes for a courtroom transcript. But when the publisher forwarded the invite, it stirred something in him. A popular podcast, Authors Unbound, wanted to interview R.M. Keller. They'd been doing a series called Anonymous Voices, exploring authors who published under pseudonyms. The producer called Ashes in Her Shoes a masterpiece of emotional autopsy. Ethan didn't say yes right away. But he didn't say no either. Instead, he sat at his desk, stared at the email, and imagined Claire's face if she ever heard him. Not Ethan, but Keller. Disguised. Distant. Honest. He replied 3 days later. I'll do it, he wrote. But I want voice modulation. No camera. No identifying information. This story lives better without a face. The host agreed. The recording session was done remotely. Ethan used a voice scrambler, just enough to distort, not enough to sound robotic. It gave his voice a smoky, androgynous edge. When the host welcomed him, he replied with a calm, deliberate cadence. Thank you for having me, he said. You've caused quite a stir, the host replied, chuckling. This book, it hit like a hurricane. Everyone wants to know. Is it true? Is it based on your life? Ethan didn't smile, but he leaned into the mic. Fiction, he said, is the final form of confession. The most elegant lies are the ones we tell through metaphor. And the truest things I've ever said were typed. There was a pause. Then the host asked, carefully, "So, this book isn't entirely fiction?" "I'd say it's honest," Ethan answered. "Painfully so. But whether it happened exactly as written, that's irrelevant. If it burns, maybe it's because someone lit the match." The host let that hang in the air. "I want to read a passage," she said. From chapter 10. Ethan closed his eyes. He knew what was coming. She wore her pink sneakers into the fire, unaware she was leaving ashes in her wake. "I think we all know a woman like this," the host said, softly. But the specificity, pink sneakers, a fire, betrayal. "It feels real." Ethan nodded. The world is full of people who play with fire. Some dance in it. Some get burned. And some leave a trail of ash so distinct that only the guilty recognize the shape. When the episode aired, it hit #1 in under 12 hours. Claire was one of the first to listen. Ethan walked in from the grocery store to find her standing in the living room, the audio still playing from her phone. She didn't look at him at first. The voice, his voice, drifted through the room, warped but unmistakably his. He had a cadence when he spoke about writing, a slight pause before the final syllable, like punctuation spoken aloud. Claire's hands were shaking. "Ethan," she whispered, the word brittle. He set the bag on the counter. "Something wrong." She held up the phone. "This is you, isn't it?" He didn't lie. He didn't need to. He walked over, gently took the phone, and hit pause. She stared at him, eyes wide and wet. "Why?" she asked, barely audible. "Why would you do this?" "Because you already confessed," he said quietly. "In my notebook." He stepped closer, the space between them taut like a wire. "I just helped the world read it." Claire staggered back a step like he'd slapped her. "This was our life," she said, voice cracking. "Our mistakes. Private. You weaponized it." "No," he replied, voice low. "Controlled. I translated it." She turned away, hands trembling as she pressed them against her face. "Do you know what this will do to us?" she whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, Jake didn't come over. He didn't call. He didn't text. Claire sat on the porch for over an hour, phone in hand, checking it every few minutes. Ethan watched from the upstairs window, the book resting beside him like a faithful companion. The wind rustled through the trees, cool and quiet. Her pink sneakers sat beside the door, speckled with dirt. The fire had burned. Now came the smoke. Later, after she came inside, Ethan sat at his desk and typed the epigraph for the second edition. "If this feels familiar, maybe it's because you were there." Then he saved the document. And finally, he smiled. It happened late. Not with shouting. Not with accusations. No flying dishes, no slammed doors. Just a single question. Claire was standing in the doorway of the study again, barefoot, her hair loose, her eyes heavy with something beyond exhaustion. Something closer to surrender. She held the book in her hands like it weighed more than paper and ink should. Ethan didn't look up. He was editing the audiobook script, making final adjustments to pacing and word stress. She waited. Then finally, in a voice too soft for the room, she asked, "Do you think some people deserve to be exposed, even if they're sorry?" Ethan paused. He didn't turn around. "I think the truth always comes out," he said, his tone even. "The smart ones just get to choose how it's told." Silence. Then the faintest sound, a broken inhale. When he finally looked at her, she was crying. Not the soft, mascara-streaked tears she shed during sad movies or quiet moments. These were raw, uneven, real. Her knees gave slightly as she sank to the edge of the couch, the book pressed to her chest like a confession booth. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her lips trembled. "I'm sorry," she finally choked. Ethan said nothing. She looked up at him, her hands shaking. "I never meant for it to happen. I didn't go looking for anything. Jake was just there. He listened. He made me feel like I mattered." "And I didn't?" Ethan asked quietly. She winced. "You did," she said quickly. "You always did. But I got selfish. And weak. And once it started, I didn't know how to stop." "You wrote about it," he said. "In my notebook." Claire's breath caught. I didn't think you'd ever read it. I just needed to put it somewhere. To let it out. And you did," Ethan replied. "Now the world's reading it too." She sobbed again, lower now, as if trying not to wake something sleeping. "I destroyed us," she whispered. "Didn't I?" Ethan looked at her for a long time. Not with anger. Not even with resentment. Just clarity. "No," he said. "You wrote the first line. I just finished the story." They didn't speak for the rest of the night. Claire slept in the guest room. Ethan returned to his study and poured himself a drink, not out of celebration. Not revenge. Just stillness. He played the podcast again, listening to his own altered voice speak truth into the dark. Pain turns honest people into artists, and liars into metaphors. He remembered typing that line at 3 a.m. while Claire had been in the shower, humming. Funny how much sound lies can make. By morning, Claire was gone. Not dramatically. No note, no suitcases. Just gone. Her keys were still on the hook. Her phone left on the charger. She needed space, probably. Or maybe shame doesn't leave room for logistics. Ethan didn't chase her. He made himself breakfast, fed the neighbor's cat, checked his inbox, more podcast invites, an essay pitch from The Atlantic, an anonymous email with nothing but the subject line. I know it was you. And I loved it. He deleted it. He checked the forums. Book talk was ablaze again. One video in particular was going viral. A woman crying on camera after finishing Ashes in her shoes. Whoever this author is, I just want to say, you made me feel seen. You made my heartbreak feel like it mattered. Thank you for not protecting the people who didn't protect you. Thousands of likes, shares, comments, and among them, one he stared at for a long time. Some metaphors wear laces. He leaned back in his chair, the early sunlight spilling through the blinds, casting slashes of light across the floor. The house was quiet again, but this time, the silence wasn't suffocating. It was honest. Ethan didn't plan to reveal himself. He liked the silence, the distance, the power of being present and invisible all at once. But silence, like secrets, eventually collapses under its own weight. The push came subtly, an op-ed in the New Yorker titled The Literature of the Unnamed. Who is R.M. Keller? That went viral within a day. Theories spilled across social media. Reddit lit up. Podcasts obsessed. They're clearly someone who's lived this. It's too emotionally surgical to be imagined. I think it's a woman. Maybe someone with a journalism background. No, it reads like a novelist who's bled out on the page before. Whoever they are, they've been betrayed. The publisher reached out. I know we promised anonymity, the editor wrote delicately. But this book, it's bigger than anything we expected. If you step forward, just once, it could change everything. Ethan read that email 3 times. Then closed it. Then reopened it. He wasn't sure what made him say yes. Maybe it was control. Maybe it was the need to put his own name on the pain. Or maybe it was the simple, undeniable truth. He was ready to stop hiding. The announcement was made the following Monday. Ethan Miller, author of 5 previous novels, is R.M. Keller. The publishing world convulsed. Some cheered, some gasped, some rolled their eyes at the pseudonym trick, but none could deny the truth at the center. The man who had disappeared from the literary scene for 3 years had returned with fire in his pen and ash in his wake. Sales doubled overnight. Bookstores scrambled for more copies. Talk shows called. 2 movie producers reached out. But it was the email from a librarian in Montana that stuck with him most. Your book made me grieve a betrayal I never let myself feel. Thank you for writing it exactly the way you did. Raw, cold, honest. It didn't just burn me. It baptized me. Claire didn't call. He wasn't sure if she ever would. And that, surprisingly, felt okay. Jake had vanished from their lives completely. A mutual friend mentioned in passing that he'd left town, maybe somewhere in Arizona. Maybe running from the fire, or maybe just from the smoke that followed. The betrayal was no longer a knife in Ethan's chest. It was ink, bound, published, and reprinted. At his first public signing, the line stretched out the door. Readers brought dog-eared copies, notebooks full of highlighted passages, and even tattoos of his words. Some cried. Some just held his hand. A few couldn't speak at all. He signed them all. R.M. Keller, and then, beneath it, in clean, confident script, Ethan Miller. It wasn't until the very end of the line that a young woman approached him holding a fresh hardcover. She smiled shyly and slid the book toward him. Is it true? She asked. He looked up. Is what true? The pink sneakers, she said. Were they a metaphor? He paused, then smiled, and signed her book. Some metaphors wear laces. That night, alone in his hotel room, he stood by the window looking out over the lights of the city. It buzzed below, alive and indifferent, just the way he liked it. He poured a drink, sat at the desk, and opened a blank document. The cursor blinked back at him. This time, he didn't flinch. He typed the first line of his new story. This time, the fire started with a kiss, not a match. Then he leaned back and breathed deeply. For the first time in months, the air felt clean.